It's Friday, July 15th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, so admittedly, not a big news week once again for PlayStation. Really more of a Nintendo week if you have not fucking noticed. So we won't necessarily get into that, but what we will do is talk about some small PlayStation things that still did happen. Kind of the usual stuff, but let's get into it. So, kind of the one thing we already knew is that Sony's not going to be at Gamescom this year. Apparently a PlayStation France representative already kind of stepped forward and said, no, we're not going to be at Gamescom this year. This also means that Microsoft once again won't be there this year. EA is not going to be holding a conference this year. Apparently Sony has a booth, I believe. So they're going to be showing stuff off there, but they certainly won't have a hour, 2 hour long conference showing everything. Of course, last year they didn't do Gamescom because they opted for Paris Games Week, which was further away from E3. They didn't want E3 and Gamescom to be so close to each other. So it seems like that's probably what Sony's going to be doing once again this year, although we don't know for sure if they're going to do Paris Games Week. In fact, Paris might not be the best situation right now for Sony to even hold a press conference there. And also there's still TGS and PSX as well, which, PSX is just Sony's own forward, event basically that they just created only 2 years ago. So, and that's the thing, you with all these long press conferences, you got to figure they try to save certain announcements for each show, and now they added a whole new show to the mix. So, I'm thinking there might even be the possibility that they'll just skip Gamescom and Paris together this year. But we'll have to wait and see what Sony actually does. So earlier this week, Sony said that with PlayStation VR, when it actually launches, they said every single PlayStation VR game is going to support DualShock 4 input. So you don't necessarily have to use a PlayStation Move controller unless the game, supports it extra. But now that's no longer the case. Only a few days later, Sony actually responded to this and kind of gave a proper update and said, no, there are some PlayStation VR games that absolutely do require PlayStation Move controllers. One of those games is actually going to be a Job Simulator. Job Simulator is coming out launch on PlayStation VR, and that game requires 2 PlayStation Move controllers. So, actually, we've already seen a few box art images for PlayStation VR games. It's going to be very much in line with previous box arts for, all past consoles and past hardware manufacturers, where they kind of add a little extra label to let you know what peripherals you need, what's absolutely required, what's supported. So even if you're, don't do your research and you see these things in the store, you will know absolutely for sure what you need and if it's compatible and whatnot. So PlayStation VR compatible means you can use VR with it. VR required means you need VR. I'm sure it's also going to say something along the lines of, you do need Move controllers as well. So just keep that in mind when you are possibly shopping around for PlayStation VR stuff come this October, which it is still coming out October 13th. Sony has also reconfirmed that they are on track to hit that date. They are doing full production and they're ready to hit it. So I know at this year's E3, when we all saw the new God of War footage, a lot of us were taken a little bit aback by it because it isn't necessarily the God of War that we're all completely used to. So obviously we are kind of understanding that this is a completely new direction for the game. This past week, the games director Cory Barlog was talking to EPN.TV, doing a little interview there, discussing about the game's influences. And of course, a lot of people pointed out this looks very much like it's a little bit of The Last of Us because you're walking around with your son now, and of course it's over the shoulder, and obviously the one thing that God of War is certainly not used to, which is that which is like extended dialogue and stuff, and actually meaningful story and whatnot. So there's one quote that Cory mentioned that I'd like to share. It's he says, "The Last of Us is an amazing game. Naughty Dog is an unbelievably talented team, and to be compared to them is awesome. But for me, the influence is a lot more like the transition from Resident Evil 3 to Resident Evil 4, and the expansion in the audience being ready for more mature stories. And not mature as in mature, but really as in dramatically challenging people to dig a little deeper, not handing all the answers to them." He continued saying, "The Last of Us had a role in this, and I'm happy. Apparently we are entering a period in which the players are looking for this type of content." And that's certainly true. I mean, if anything, this type of content has been the norm for a while now, especially, say, when it was definitely the transition from, like, PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3, Xbox to 360. When we got into that generation, there was a lot more games where it was like, it wasn't necessarily cartoony anymore. It wasn't necessarily about platformers or more artistically approached games or colorful games. Obviously PS3 and 360 were heavily dominated by like first-person shooters and everything. But that generation of consoles also brought forth a whole new sort of approach to game development, which is that the consoles had a lot more power back then to start making people look a little bit more realistic in games, to do some more dramatically larger environments and, trying to create an actual compelling story, something that they can actually try to entice the player into really getting, emotionally invested in And so this has kind of been going around for a while, and God of War is one of those games where it's like it didn't necessarily follow that format. And that's mostly because God of War was the kind of game where you were just hacking and slashing everything, and the cutscenes were just sort of nice little in-betweens, more or less, until you actually got back to the killing. And of course, God of War had a story, but for a lot of people, it wasn't necessarily meaningful. And that's, of course, what they're trying to do with the newest God of War. And certainly, that's the interesting thing, is that it's a sequel too, so it's not necessarily starting from scratch. This is them trying to really take Kratos and turn him into a character that's actually worth caring about. And I know for a lot of people that was always their problem with the God of War franchise. But so hopefully and that's the thing. I'm really excited about it still. It's a little jarring to me, and I'll say that as a God of War fan, I'm certainly going to be a little bit cautiously optimistic. But at the same time, God of War was a very formulaic series, and it is refreshing to see it take a dramatically different approach. Alright, let's get into some PS4 NEO, because every single week we have some new things to talk about this damn thing, except Sony actually hasn't shown us what it looks like or actually confirmed any major details, other than the fact that it exists. But what we did have this week is a leak of some confidential slideshow documents that were apparently only meant for developers, so I can leave you a link down below for you to go look at these things yourself. But apparently these are real, slides that were given to developers and everything, kind of telling us the same things that we already knew, which, if anything, obviously you can't take this thing for fact, but it more or less kind of solidifies the previous rumors that we've heard before from multiple sources about PS4 NEO, and certainly what we think this thing's going to be. And it's the same stuff, right? It's slightly stronger, slightly more powerful PlayStation 4. It's 8 cores, 2.1 gigahertz, 1.3 times faster than the original PlayStation 4. Uses an enhanced GPU of the original PS4. It's still using 8 gigabytes GDDR5 RAM, but it's just running at a higher bandwidth. Developers are encouraged to make sure the frame rate is the same as original PS4 games, but obviously make it a little bit faster. Of course, the one thing here is we're all kind of aware that while the PS4 NEO is certainly a nicer piece of kit, it's not necessarily going to be able to do 4K native games still. And that document kind of gets a little bit into that, saying developers hope, Sony is saying that we hope you developers kind of approach games in a way where instead of bumping the resolution up only to 1440p, which wouldn't necessarily make a drastic difference on a 4K television, they'd prefer you to go they'd prefer you to do a checkboard rendering method, which would bring the game closer to a visual of 2160p, which would make the game actually have you could really tell the difference, say, from 1080p. Whenever games get released from October and onwards, they must support PS4 and PS4 NEO. It's okay to release a PS4 NEO game before the NEO actually launches. Literally the same stuff, really. In fact, this is probably the same sort of information we got from the earliest PS4 NEO rumor, but now we actually get to look at these, slides and documents and whatnot. So I think the one thing to take away from this is that, yeah, it's more or less the same thing we've kind of already heard, which kind of tells us this is definitely what is going to happen. I guess the one thing to also keep in mind is that since this is kind of the same information, this isn't necessarily the most updated information, so anything that Sony might have done or changed or altered in any sort of way could be drastically different from, say, what we're being, told now and what we're reading now on the internet. But yeah, we keep talking about NEO every single week. We're getting closer and closer to whenever this thing finally gets released, so I just want to see the damn thing at this point. I guess what I'm really interested in is, what the actual physical box will look like, if it'll be drastically different from the current box, or if Sony will take the route and slim down the current console and then make the current console just PS4 NEO, more or less. I'm ready, but apparently Sony's not. Those are some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. The Rhino Gaming topic was about PlayStation Vita and what would happen if it was really, really successful. Pretty much one of the biggest cock tease topics I've done, because it kind of sucks theoretically talking about what if Vita did really, really well when, today it kind of is not doing very well at all. But check out that video, because it actually would make Sony's future pretty different if Vita was doing very, very well. It would actually put them in a pretty good financial position than they are right now. And then Persistence Let's Play, that's going on well and good. That's pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I'll see you guys all next Friday.